All right, I'm going to go over the camera tracking thing here with just some extra stuff. You don't have to do it this way, but if you want to do it this way, this is I think, a superior way to doing the tracking stuff after you've done it. So this is up to 300 frames. It's how far is linked up. You can see a little hologram thing there. These banners have not been removed yet. They will be removed. And then there's a little banner, and then you can see it's digital. Okay, very cool. Sweet. All right. So here's what the difference is in how I did all of my stuff. So I read in the footage just like before. That's no different. Okay. I camera tracked just like before. That again is no different. There we go. Okay. So camera track, everything's lined up. Why I have these extra frames there. I created a camera, created a model builder. Now this is where I did a little bit different. Instead of tracking, because I'm sure that when you do this, if you've already kind of started it, if you're trying to replace like the background, there it is. If you're trying to replace like one of these banners here, you probably tracked just this back area, like exactly that back area, and you may have tracked exactly this back top area and exactly this area here if you're getting rid of that one and so on. The model builder has a lot more tools in it than we went over before, okay? So there's a lot you can do with it. So I'm going to just ignore this model builder for a second, close all these, and add a new model builder. So my source goes here, my camera goes there. Okay, so now I'm looking through my model builder again. I'm going to track this item right there. Now you'll notice that it's not perfectly flat. If you've been out there, it's kind of like a bowed shape, and you can definitely tell that right here, okay? So I'm going to go to some random frame, like whatever, 340, 55, that looks good. I'm going to create a shape using a card, same way we've done before. Line up the corners, so that one will go about there. This one will go about there. This one will go about there, and that one will go about there. Okay, now you'll notice that it doesn't line up with the bottom, and that's fine. It also doesn't line up with the top. That's fine too. The first thing we do is just let it go through and do its track, get it lined up. So this is 355. I'm going to scoot up a bit, and you'll see it goes off. That's fine, and then I just adjust it. So that looks good there. I'll go up the other way. Check it out both sides. Go down there. All right, so that's pretty close. All right, so now I'm happy with how it tracked that specific item. If you're ever uncertain, always go like on the inside, okay? Because it's a lot easier to kind of fake it if it's on the inside of it. Then if it's hanging off, it doesn't make sense that there would be like a hologram there. So all we've done so far is we've stayed in this align tool. Come on. If you right click mode, we've been in align mode, okay? So if we switch this to edit mode, we can actually grab vertices, which are the points, and Nuke will think it's going to crash. It's not going to. I will save just to verify. Yes, it's fine now. Okay. I'll go back to my vertex, and if I click on one of these, come on. It did this before. It wants me to close this window and then reopen it back up again, and then right click and go to vertex. Jump out of there, jump back into here. What did you do before? Object surface. No, no. I will close Nuke and I will reopen Nuke. It should let me grab the points and just pull the points down. And once I do that, then I will have that rounded surface just like we're seeing. I think the Nuke X part the X might have crashed. That's why I did do that. That's fine there. All right, so I'm looking through Model Builder 2. I've clicked on my camera here. I'm in this mode, and I switch back to that mode. There we go. Okay, so now let's try this again. I'm going to right-click, Mode, Edit, right-click Vertex. There we go. So now I can grab the vertices and then just slide this down. Now, if I scrub, you'll see that those points slide with it too, which is awesome. Then I can do the same thing up top. Just grab these, slide them down. Grab that one, slide it down. And then these ones that are in the middle, those have to kind of follow that same contour. They can't just be straight. Otherwise, when I add text to this, it's going to be squished on top and then stretched out on the bottom. So I'm going to pull this down like this, and then pull that down like that. And I'm just trying to keep even spacing between each of these. So something like that. And I can always come back and adjust. So that's good, I like that. And cool. So that's it. So then I would take this piece, I'd bake it out, and then I would have that piece there that I could then drop whatever I want on. I'll show you the text part of that in a minute. So now we can take this same concept, and we can do that basically to rebuild this entire quadrant, okay? So if I go here to my card, and I'm going to use this wall here as my starting point. That should be good like that. I can see this bottom corner, so I'm going to line up this bottom corner, making sure that I'm in the align mode. There we go. So that'll be my bottom corner. This will be my top corner. It's hard to see, but it's right about there. I can double check it by kind of following this line along the wall. Yep. And then this one here. Now this is where this tool is awesome, because I'm going to use this white edge as my way to line this up, okay? So as I drag this down here, I know that this line should line up with the floor, like that. And then I can then scoot it along until I get that there, and then until I scoot this along and kind of get that there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just should be, even on both sides. So that perspective of that plane looks like it's that wall. Once you start lining up one of these things with the model builder, the next one and the next one and the next one, it's more accurate, so it's easier for it to solve. So I may not have to do much adjusting on this at all. So I'm at 307. So I'm going to scoot back. You can see that wall is pretty solid. There's no adjusting I really need to do to that at all. That's pretty good. Okay, now here's where it's, again, awesome. I'm going to go to the end of my sequence. I'm going to right-click, go to Edit Mode, go to Edge Loop Selection, and grab, I guess not Edge Loop Selection, it's regular Edge Selection, which is these. And then if I grab the red arrow, which is kind of hard to see, but it's right there, I can then expand this all the way across that. Now I'm going to expand it right to about here. And then I'm going to grab these two and expand that, right along there. Now you'll see if I do this, it's going to stretch it out. I don't want to stretch that out. So if I right click, I can extrude it. And now I just pull out those edges. Okay, so it's basically we're 3D modeling while inside of Nuke. And I can take these edges here and do the same thing for that back wall. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to extrude, I'm going to pull it over. Now, it's not perfect, but then I can still go back. Let's say I go back to about here. I'll get this pretty lined up. Maybe I'll move this up a bit, like so. That's pretty good there. I can't really see the back corner of this one, but it's pretty close to that. If I follow this line in, you know, that might be down a little bit, but I'll, again, adjust it. I'm going to switch to vertex mode and maybe just pull that down, pull that over. There we go. All right, then I'll go back to edge mode, grab these edges, go back to extrude, grab the red. Back to vertex mode, just grab this and push it up. And you can see within a pretty short amount of time, I essentially have that whole room mapped out. So once I have that, it's pretty much like whatever I want to put wherever, I can do that. Even where I have this opening, I'm going to go to edges and grab this and extrude, or try to extrude. There it goes. And then I can grab this and this and this and extrude. And then I can grab this and this. Oops, that's the wrong one. There it goes. And now instead of having to make a card over here, a card over there, a card on the ceiling, a card all these other places, that's the entire room. And I can even take this one and extrude it. And now the ceiling is pretty much done too. It just has to be adjusted right in this corner. There we go. If I was just to drop a texture on there, yes it would. But because we're projecting the texture on, it doesn't. Okay? So now, let's pretend that that's good. We can also grab, just for, you know, while we're doing all of this stuff, let's just grab the floor too, right? And extrude. I think there's a hotkey too. I just can't remember what the hotkey is. There's that. And again, I'll go to the vertex, grab that, and just squish that over there. Cool. So that's everything. So now I'll go back here and I will bake that geometry. And so now I basically have my entire room mapped out. So not that we would do this, but let's just say for fun, I read in a single image from my sequence. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to go to my footage, I'm going to go to my sequences off, I'm going to read in frame 340, I think, is like the middle of this. Close enough. All right, so that's 347. So I'm going to copy my camera, paste that. I'm going to create a project 3D, and this is what I did in the other one when we erased something from the table or erased something from the floor. It's the same kind of setup. There's my camera, there's my image, or my item. This is my image, or my, sorry, this is the image, this is the item. And I projected onto the wrong one. That's my table. Just ignore that for a second. I did not make a mistake. There we go. So now if we look at this, we get this. And now that looks pretty disgustingly horrible from this direction, but that's my entire room. Now watch what happens when I hook this up to a scene node and actually like render this out. So scene node, camera goes in there. Oops. My model goes in there. I'm going to add a scanline render to this. There's my camera way up here. Come on. So that's what I get when I render it out. It looks exactly the same. When I hit play, oops. Why aren't you animating, camera? Oops, that's not my animated camera, that's why. Delete you, camera. I need my animated one, which is down here. There we go. So there's my animated camera. Let's try that again. So animated camera. Okay, and then I need to copy the camera for the projection. And then I believe, like I said, this was 340 is when I did this. 347. Yep. So I'm going to go to camera 6, delete all my keyframes from here. All right, so now let's try that again. So this is the camera, that's the one that's moving. Yes, all right. Cool. So now what we're looking at here is essentially a still image. Okay, this is basically that still image being projected onto all of those pieces, and the camera is just sweeping across. So it looks like we're seeing a kind of perspective here, but we're not. It literally is just a flat image. Now obviously, we missed some stuff on this side because we don't have that in the image. We missed stuff on the other side because we don't have that in the image. But what this allows us to do is very easily just say, okay, I'm going to erase this image inside Photoshop, and then I can use the top and the side for this type of thing. That's all I have to do. So if I go into Photoshop and I open up image 347, because that's the one I'm using, 2560, banner replacement, footage, S entry 347, right there. I'm going to save this as cleanup. Sure. And then I can just go through and clone stamp this out. Now, how many of you, if you're going to clone stamp, you grab the clone stamper like this, and then you start clone stamping like that? No? What do you do then? Right. You would clone stamp it, right? Just like that? Right. Okay, a separate layer, right?
You have to change the setting to current and below.
Okay.
If I mess up, I just have to erase a little bit off.
Okay. Now what happens when I take, let's just say I take some bricks from this area and I put them there? We'll ignore the sign right there. I'll erase that. Okay. Look at the size of these bricks compared to how big they should be, right? So in order for us to make this look more accurate, not only do we have to clone stamp, but we also have to resize our stuff. Have you heard of the perspective grid inside Photoshop? You have. Then why wouldn't you jump to that first? For those who don't know what the perspective grid is, I lied. I don't want perspective. I want vanishing point. Have you heard of vanishing point? Kind of. Okay. So what vanishing point allows us to do is basically the same thing I just did inside of Nuke, but it allows us to do it inside of Photoshop. So if I go here and I just click a point, come on. I have to zoom out using Control minus, and then I can click that. There we go. So it allows me to create this perspective grid. And now when I clone stamp, it'll actually clone stamp in perspective. So if I had something this big on the front of this and I clone stamp, it'll automatically shrink it down to that big on that side, which is, again, awesome. You can also take this, if I go here, yeah, I was in the right tool. Why didn't that work? Oh, here. And then I hold down, I think it's Control, and I drag. It allows me to drag out the back. And then I hold Control again, and I drag this. It allows me to drag that out. And then the same thing for the floor. And then the same thing for the ceiling. Now when I clone something here, it only allows me to clone stamp one plane at a time. So I can't clone stamp from like the side wall to the ceiling. I have to switch between the two. So now that I have that, now I use my clone stamp. Now I didn't make a new layer, and I should have made a new layer and copied it, but whatever. Let me make sure I have this clicked. I'll go to my clone stamp, and I alt-click where I want it to clone from. Now just to show you, even if I sampled from down here, and then I start painting there, it's automatically changing the shape and the direction and the size of all those bricks. Okay, so this is a much more efficient way to do something like that. Now, it's definitely not blending in the colors. That's where we would have to go back into our layers and adjust that. But that is like 10 times more easy than trying to clone stamp and then resize and whatever. I could also alt-click here, line it up with that area there, and you can see how much easier, again, that's going to be to do all of that business. Okay, so I can do all of that, and then when I'm ready, I click on the ceiling part, I go to my clone stamper, and then do the same thing. Alt-click in a section, go to where I'm trying to get rid of that. Now, it's not perfect, so it may be off a little bit, but you just have to deal with that. It's 10 times better than just going out with what you were going to do. There we go. And I'm getting an extra light. I'll just erase the light later. I'm not sure why I'm getting an extra banner here. That should be definitely gone, but I'll just try to erase that like this. There we go. Okay. And then you'd go through and obviously clean up all of that mess. All right, now on the one that I cleaned up, left entry, I have two of these. There you go. There it is. I don't know why I have two of them the same exact thing. So there's my cleaned up version. Now even though there's some stuff messed up here, I can still come back and still straighten this out just by using, again, the regular clone stamp like on top of it on a different layer. And then just using a mask just to kind of blend in some of these pieces, okay? So that's what I'm doing there later. So now once I have that, this is what I did. So here's my cleaned up version. I projected it onto that piece of geometry, so just that 3D wall. It's in a scene, it's in a scanline render, and then let me close all these so we can just see the one. So that's what the cleaned up version looks like, nice and cleaned up in that corner. Now it's not perfect, like I said, some of the stuff will cover it anyway. Now once it's cleaned up, it goes into a merge. And then this is what we get. So you can see how it looks like that corner is all nice and clean, obviously not perfectly clean, but nice enough cleaned. But we do have this weird line. Now, what I did was I made a roto that is just the area that I want, okay? Because when you do that projection on that huge piece of geometry, you're going to get that huge piece of geometry outside of Nuke, like rendered out. So when I did the roto for this, I basically just created a shape like that, and then animated the shape moving along with what I wanted it to be masked off. If I don't have that roto there, I get this. If I look at where that roto is, you can see it's basically just following those items that I wanted to mask off. Okay, and the roto is just hand animated. I literally just drew it and then let it follow it. Okay, and then I just connected it right to the mask for where that comes together. Don't try to go too crazy. Like, let me delete all this stuff because this is just, well, not all that stuff because I need that, this stuff. There we go. So do one thing at a time. So the first thing I did was I cleaned up the banners. That's all cleaning up of the banners on that left side. That's all that is. This is it merging in, and then there's a roto just isolating that one area. And then I added in this text. That's the text that goes across the little thing. It says, this is a test, why don't you read anymore, where are all the polar bears, and what up? I had to transform it to get it in the right position. I had to merge it on top of a blue so I would have some kind of background. So you can see what these other things would do when it gets all put together. Just delete that. There we go. And that. Okay. So originally when I drop my text in here, this is what I get. My text is kind of like squished near the top. Okay, and that obviously is not what I wanted to do. So I added a transform node to the text, and then I animated it coming in and off screen. I don't know why it's not showing up now. Oh, my animation for the text happens way too early. It happens at like frame 1. So I had to add a frame range to this and then retime it. My frame range says that my animation for the text goes from 1 to 53. And if you look at the animation for it, this is what it does. Oops. It just comes on the screen and then goes off screen. And I wanted to loop that so it was constantly happening. Okay? So part of this transform is to get it stretched out. The other part is to get it in the right spot so it's animated. So if you look at my scales here, you'll see one of my scales is bigger than the other one. If it was back to 1, it would be all squished. And so now it's not squished. Then I did a frame range. This basically just tells Nuke how long it is. If I don't do that, Nuke has no idea how long this animation is. Even though we know it starts here and ends there, it doesn't know if we want to keep it on screen or just cut it off. So I told it that's the frame range. And then I added a retime. And what the retime allows me to do is say, after this animation's over, I want you to loop it. And so what it'll do is it'll go from 1 to frame 53, and then it loops back from 1 to 53, then loops back from 1 to 53. So it's a very easy way to create a little loopable animation. Okay. If you brought in an animation from After Effects or whatever, you could do the same thing. Add a retime node to it, and then have it loop so that it loops. If you brought in an animation from After Effects and the time needed to be offset, you could add a time offset. And I'll show that in a second. But this allows you to offset your animation so it starts at a later time. So maybe it starts at frame 200. Oops, come on. So I created text. I dropped it into a transform so I could animate it. I added the merge with this constant so I have a color on the background. There it is. I made it a frame range, retime, added it onto my card. There it is. Ignore the flashing. And then I just dropped it into another scene node. So every item that you have, that you've tracked, has to be on a different scene node in a different camera, unless they're like together items, right? So if I have two banners, they're both in the same relative like area, they're both doing the same kind of thing, that's fine. But I can't have a bunch of stuff in separate areas or on the same scene node if I want them to be doing different things. I wanted this to be doing something different. Very similar to our screens that we had. The monitors are doing one kind of merge back in there where they're doing a plus. The cleanup stuff was doing something different, so that has to be done separately, okay? So just be aware of that. And now, you're not going to know that right away, so what you do is, you can put all your stuff together, see that there's a problem, and then start breaking stuff apart and then separating it. Okay, that's what I did with this. I made my text, I put it onto a card. If it moves, there we go. I put it onto that card, I put it into the scene, merged it in there, and then it didn't work. Okay, you can see it's all squished. So then I said, okay, well there's obviously something wrong with that, so let me add a transform node to this. There we go, so that fits better. And I said, well, I should get a background in there. So then I decided to create a constant and make this merge. And then I said, that's cool. Now I want it to loop because after it goes away, it's kind of stupid. So then I added the frame range and the retime, and then I got that. Okay, you will not ever get to the point where you know exactly what to do every single time. It's basically you start with something, you end with that, and then you kind of work your way back and forth to figure out what else will look good. Okay, my scanline render is this. This is the whole purpose of doing that so that I get this animation on this card going side to side. Then I added a glow to it so it has some kind of glowy feature. And then that gets merged on top of my original desk. And then this is a plus. If I set this to over, you can't read it, number one. And number two, it just doesn't have the same effect. Okay, so I set that to a plus. I could also play with this mix at the bottom. So if I want to control how much of that is actually being pulled off of there, I can definitely do that as well. All right, so that's my first one, was I cleaned up, then I added that little item. Then what I want to do is add this banner. So I'm going to provide this for you, but what I did was I went into a 3D app, this one's called Maya, and I created this little animation of a banner, because I wanted this thing to look like it's like unfolding, okay? There it is, gorgeous, right? Just a plain, it's animated, boom, and then I exported out this piece, which is the top, and then I exported this piece, which is the bottom, just so I would have two separate pieces. Those two pieces are inside of your, the server. I put it on there, and I put it onto the 2560 banner geometry. So there's the banner, which is the animation, and then there's a banner holder, which is just that holder piece. So the main banner, I made a, I'll start with how I did this first. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's close this window. There we go. So I brought this in, so I just read geometry. So if you hit the tab key and type in read geometry, it lets you bring geometry into your scene. I click the little folder, I find my geometry, which is the banner holder, I hit open. Then it just puts it kind of in a random spot. Okay, so this is not anywhere near where it should be inside my scene in order for it to look like it's hanging from the ceiling. So I can't do anything with that yet until it's actually put into a scene node so I can see what it's going to look like. So just for now, let me just deselect or remove it from here and then connect that into that. Okay, so I add this into my scanline render. Where'd it go? Right, so it's not there, right? Because it's like way off in the distance. Here's my camera, and here's that banner holder, okay? If I merge everything together just so we can see it, it's like nowhere in town. So what I have to do is I have to put it all together. It's very difficult to do that when I can't even see like where is the rest of the geometry at. So what I did was, let me close that. I opened up my model builder, and then I could see, okay, here's the model builder, here's this, I need to get this into this area because that's where my buildings are. So then I added a transform geometry. So here's my read geometry, I added a transform geometry to this, okay? And then transform geometry, I used it to move, to scale, and then to rotate to get that into position. Yours is going to be a different spot, so it doesn't matter if you copy my stuffs. And then if I drag this onto there, you'll see that he ends up, oops, where are you at? Oh, I have to view the correct one. There he is. And if I go back to my scan line, he is right there. Okay? So then I also added a light to my scene because I wanted to have some light in the scene. And then I also added a Fong. In order for you to get any kind of shading, lighting, or anything on this thing, you have to have some sort of material inside this. So a Fong is a good one to add. So I added that Fong, and now I can add some shading to it so it's not just a solid color. This is what a solid color would look like on here, and it looks pretty terrible. That's not it. There it is. So it's just like that. It's just like one solid color. So I want to have some sort of shading in there so that it looks like it's somewhat realistic. So I added this Fong. The Fong allows you to control things like the specular and the diffuse and the shininess. Updating, maybe. There it goes. I can also control things like emission. In this case, it doesn't really do anything, but I could. In order for that to work, I have to connect everything to a constant. So I just made a constant, and this is basically like the color of this thing. What was that? Just to help separate it, because the Phong has all these maps. There's one that says S, that's the specular, which is the shininess. There's one that says D, which is the diffuse. And then there's the base one, which is just like what color is it. So just so I can separate each one of those so I can see them, that's what I did. Okay, so that helps me separate it. So I have my constant. Each one of these is piped into a Phong. The emitter one, which is E, didn't really need anything, so you don't worry about that. Cool. So then I merged this into my scene, and I did add a defocus node, just so it would be a little bit softer than it was. Maybe it's a little bit too crisp here, so now it's a little bit softer. And then the difference between like something like a defocus and a blur is that the defocus tries to maintain the highlights a little bit more. It's kind of like if you looked at a camera and you blurred some, or you took a picture of someone with like a really small aperture. Yes, really small aperture size, but it's really big. The highlights would be really like out of focus, but they would still be there. It's not like everything blurs together into this like mushiness. That's what defocus does. All right, so there's that. And then all of this stuff over here, that's all of my banner sheet. Actually, all this stuff too, okay? Now, it looks complex, but it's really not, okay? Because realistically, that's my banner there. So let me copy this so you can see it. Oops. All right, so here's my banner. And then I have a scene node, I have my camera, I have my scanline render. Okay, so he goes into the scene node, the camera goes into the camera, and then this would get rendered. Now, again, I know what stuff is going to need to be here. One, my animation starts right away. So when I hit play, there goes my animation. I can't have my animation starting right at the beginning because it doesn't make sense. So if you see here, I added a time offset on my geometry. So I'm going to go to my geometry, I'll paste that time offset. Okay, so now the animation actually happens way over here. It's also like right in front of the camera, not in a good spot. So then I added a transform geometry to that. So now it's in the correct spot. All right, I could probably offset that time a little bit more, like 225. There we go. Okay, so that's all I did pretty much for this item. The rest of this is all just what is actually on the banner, okay? So at that point, you can really kind of go into it and just customize what you want it to be. So I went into Photoshop. Actually, I went into Photoshop, I went into After Effects, I went into several programs. And I just made, what I want the banner to look like. Loading, there it is. MCC, and then women's basketball, boom, there we go. Okay, so I could leave it just like that. That's acceptable. On mine, I added some other stuff. So I went into Cinema 4D and I rendered this out, which is a little honeycomb pattern. And then I have a noise that's on here too. And I added the noise to the honeycomb pattern just to give it some variation. Okay, so that's all I did there. I also made sure that I resized all of these. So this, the banner's proportions are 1.8 times taller than it is wide. So any document I make, anything in Photoshop or Illustrator or After Effects or whatever, that has to maintain those same proportions. So if I make a document that is, I'll just go to Photoshop so you can see this. If I make it, let's say, 1 inch, pixels won't work. There we go. So I make it 1 inch in the width, it'll be 1.8 inches in the height. Okay, now that's not a very big document, so I can always go and resize it to something even bigger. So let's say that I put in 2000. So you'll see that the 2000 is the width, 3600 is the height, okay? So as long as it maintains those same proportions, I'll be fine whatever resolution I go with, okay? When I get into Nuke, I need to make sure that everything is reformatted to fit onto that card. And so here, I reformatted to 1000 by 1800 because that's what worked in my image. I reformatted this to 1000 by 1800. I reformatted this to 1000 by 1800. Okay? That way I'm making sure that my noise is the same size, because you can see it's obviously not the correct size here. Now it is. This one gets reformatted. And so now this is all just putting these things together. So that instead of it being just a plain image, I have something that's a little bit more variation to it. Okay? Now I could have also done all of this stuff inside of After Effects. I could have taken the honeycomb pattern, dropped it inside of After Effects, and done this whole animation. I could have simply made a motion graphics piece inside of After Effects doing all this stuff. I could have stuck with the flat image I used in Photoshop, and that would have been sufficient as well. Okay? It's just a matter of what you want to do with these things. Now, at no point did I know that I was going to merge or multiply this here. I literally created this, created that, added a merge, and then I said, okay, what's going to look good? Maybe the top. I probably could have gone with the top as well, because multiply looks like it's pretty close to the same thing. I just wanted variation with this one, so this one isn't actually a huge deal, so just set that back. And then I did a little grade on it to bring it down, and then I did this. So this one I set to a from. If I set it to multiply here, that's way too dark. If I set it to minus, nope, nope. Max, maybe that would work, but then you'll see that I get this in like weird spots, but not like all over. Okay, so I just went through and just tried to find which one is going to look the best for what I want. And from gave me this nice little pattern over the entire thing. That's what I used from for. If you are curious about the math, you can hold your mouse over this. There's the math involved in each one of those. Have fun. Okay, and then I just, oops. I did merge my original image with this purple because I wanted it to have this kind of purpley, glowy hue to it. It's kind of hard to tell, but it definitely looked better than it did before. Yep. And there's with the honeycomb. And then basically I'm using some masks inside here for later stuff. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, but I'm also, as I'm playing with these, I'm focusing on not only the one image, but I'm also focusing on the transparency of it. There we go. So now that all gets put into this, and then this is what renders out. There's my banner. And it's ridiculous because that's how big it's going to be. And you can barely see the honeycombs in there, okay? So don't spend too much time on this stuff because of what we're doing. It's not critically essential. You're not even able to see it. I will notice it's there on mine because I just want, fancier stuff. If I pre-multiply this, looking at the alpha channel, you can see the white is going to be solid, and then the black will be gone, and then the gray will be half there. So when this pre-multiplies, basically this is transparent. So if I were just to merge this right now into here, oops, this will go there, and this will go here. You'll be able to see straight through that, okay? So I did not want that to happen yet. I did do a grade on this. On one of the channels, that's what I did a grade on. And then that gets pre-multiplied into here. And then that's my first pass. So you can see this is definitely a bit brighter than the previous one was. And then I added some more grades to different things. I defocused this a little bit. This is the glow. And then I pre-multiplied my glow. And then added that on top. Okay? So in the first one that I did, which was way over here, I just added a glow node. The other one, I made my own glow node. Okay? And it's basically just a defocus and then coloring it up. That's it. So there's my defocus. I created a color, and then I blurred it up, and then I dropped it on there. Okay? So I think that feels a little bit more fancy than going with, I really don't want to have to disable all this stuff. I guess I will, right? That. Nope, I guess I won't. All right, we'll just do this. I will copy this here. I'll paste that there. All right, so there's my image. There's my item. Pop that off. Than that. Okay, so that was straight out of the box. That's what my image would look like. Okay, so that one gives me just a little bit more excitement in, you know, what it looks like. That's what I did with that. Okay, so just extra stuff for you to kind of play with and look at and see how you would, you know, attack these kinds of things. Once you have that square, that room built up, it really is just kind of like, where do I want stuff? Because you literally could, like, I want to replace the floor. I could mask out the entire floor and replace the entire floor. If I wanted to create different banners or different signs right here, I could do that. If I wanted to erase the Macomb logo, I could do that. If I wanted to replace the brick back there, I can do that as well. Get rid of the lights. I could actually add lights over here if I wanted. There's so much stuff you can do. And it doesn't even have to be inside Nuke where all this stuff happens. If I'm just adding these lights here, I can open up that image on the side, paint the lights inside Photoshop, and just project that texture back onto that side wall. Cancel this, close that, open probably one of the first images, which is about there, let's say. I'm just grabbing this for the lecture. I would actually create or build a light somehow. Let's just say that light. That's good enough. Honest about faith. I don't think that's a really good one to be stealing, but okay. Alright, that's that. And oops. So just pretend that that looks perfect. There we go. And then I can set this to overlay. Oh, look how bright that looks. See? And then we'll throw a mask on it and then just brush that out. That looks gorgeous, right? I'll go with that. There you go. There you go. Gorgeous. Okay. So spend more time doing it, but yeah, now I could take that image and project it onto the wall, and now it would look like not now, but once I fix it, it would look like there's light coming out of there. Okay? So I could do that for all of those back there. I could, whatever. Okay, you get the idea. Same thing with the door. Once I have that quadrant lined up, you don't even have to go indented in there. Because that area is so flat anyway, I could just flatten out when I modeled that. So much stuff. Right here, instead of me denting this in, I could have just gone straight across and just put the image right there. It's so subtle you wouldn't even have noticed it. I'd find an image of a door. I could even, like I said, take a picture of a door around there, take a picture of that hallway, and just slap it up. Cool. So, just another way you can kind of attack this thing. Just more information. Questions?
You still want that door in there?
I want the door closed. Okay. Yes. You can put a giraffe in there, right, Sarah? All right, anything else? No? All right. I will be